a crown heist, fated rulers, and more. Make history come alive in your tabletop RPG campaigns.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Hey guys, it's my mission to bring you awesome interviews each and every Wednesday so that we can learn more about the world's greatest hobby, tabletop role-playing games. I try to give you a wide range of guests so we can take bits and pieces from storytelling, from history, from film and television, from anywhere we can find it. Take it all and use it to help us create better games. If you want to learn more about me and my work, you can head over to DiceGeeks.com. You can check out all my books that I create geared to helping game masters cut down their prep time and have more fun at the table. As I just mentioned, my mission is to help us play better games. Today's interview is awesome. Here it is. My guest today is the game designer and writer behind the Molten Sulfur blog, Tristan Zimmerman. Tristan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Always a delight to be here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And thank you for coming back on again. And as regular listeners of the show know, you think that history and folklore and literature are great places to mine for RPG content. Isn't that correct?
Yep. I am a huge believer in the idea that stuff that is drawn from the real world, whether that's real history or real folklore, is richer and more vibrant than stuff inspired by other sources, and that your players really can tell the difference. And, you know, when you go ahead and you take something real and you file the serial numbers off of it, put it in your fictional campaign setting, that is a recipe for a very enjoyable session.
And that is kind of your whole mission behind the Molten Sulfur blog, right?
Yep. So every week I put out a blog post about a piece of real history or folklore, sometimes real science, sometimes real literature, but mostly history and folklore, and talk about, hey, you know, what's this thing? Why is it cool? Why should you get excited about it? And how can you use it at your gaming table?
Yeah. And since you're a regular guest on the show, what we like to do is take like 3 of those topics and talk about them so that the listeners can take those and add those right into their existing campaigns. So today we will be heading back to Mali. We'll also be checking in on a monk. But first, let's hear about the Hungarian crown heist.
Yeah, so this is a really fun little piece of Hungarian history from the 15th century, and a little bit of background. So we don't have much of the regalia of royalty, right, from the Middle Ages. Surprisingly little of that has survived to the modern age. The crowns, the robes, the thrones, the so forth. But one piece that has survived and is still around today is the crown of Hungary, the so-called Holy Crown, which has its own very interesting backstory. But for the purposes of this heist, what's really important to know about it is if you were going to be the king of Hungary, you had to be crowned with this crown. If you were crowned with any other kind of crown, it didn't count. And so whenever there was a succession dispute in Hungary, it was very much in the best interest of all parties to steal the crown, right? To get your hands on the crown, because if you win and you don't have the crown, then you kind of didn't really win. And if you lose, but at least the other guy doesn't have the crown, then he didn't really win. And there's at least one case of a Hungarian king who won his succession dispute, but went his entire reign without getting his hands on the crown. His enemies had managed to smuggle it out of the country and he didn't get it back. And after he died and the crown was brought back into the country and the next king was crowned, people were able to challenge the rulings of the prior king in court and successfully get them overturned, because technically he was never king, so he didn't have the authority to make these rulings. So the theft of this crown, like, very, very much a real and important part of medieval Hungarian politics. So we got this situation, right, in starting around 1436, where the sitting King of Hungary has a daughter, and that daughter, her name is Elizabeth of Luxembourg. In addition to being the daughter of the King of Hungary, she is also the wife of the Duke of Austria. And the King of Hungary has set things up so that after he dies, he doesn't have any sons. After he dies, the crown will pass to Elizabeth's husband. And the same man, thus, will be both Duke of Austria and King of Hungary. And lo and behold, this comes to pass. The old king dies, and the Duke of Austria brings his wife Elizabeth with him, and they move to Hungary, and he gets crowned, and congratulations, he is now the king. And he rules, and Elizabeth gets pregnant. She already has one child, a daughter, but she's pregnant, so we don't know the sex of the baby that she's currently pregnant with. And then 2 years into his reign, the new king just dies, right? And Elizabeth is still pregnant. And effectively the parliament of Hungarian nobles does not like this situation. They do not like that there's not currently a king who is going to lead the army, they say, because Hungary at this time, and for several centuries around this time, is constantly at war with the Ottoman Empire. And who will lead the army? So Elizabeth, we need you to go and get yourself married to the King of Poland, like ASAP. And the King of Poland is like the 16-year-old kid, and Elizabeth is having none of it. Her father raised her to rule. She is not going to get married to some stranger and just give up all of her authority just because the parliament says so. I can lead an army perfectly well. Your reasons are stupid. And she makes some good points there. And she's pregnant, and she doesn't know the sex of the child. And so she hatches a scheme with a trusted confidant. The crown is currently locked up in a castle for safekeeping. In fact, Elizabeth herself locked it in the castle for safekeeping before her husband died. The castellan of this castle, the noble in charge of the castle, is of unclear loyalty. Is he loyal to Elizabeth, or is he loyal to the parliament and therefore the King of Poland? So they can't just ask him politely, hey, would you mind handing over the crown so that when I give birth, if the baby is a boy, we can just slap the crown on this baby and be like, ta-da, this baby is now the king. Go pound sand, King of Poland. You are no longer needed here. So she has this plan, and her confidant is this really interesting figure, a woman named Helene Kottner. Helene is a very minor member of the Austrian nobility. She is technically an aristocrat. She's technically a blue blood, highborn noble, whatever you want to call it. But she is so low on the hierarchy. She is practically a burgher. She's practically a wealthy merchant type on the grand social order of things. But she is loyal, she is trustworthy, and she is trusted. She is a longtime friend and confidant and servant, kind of in scare quotes, to Queen Elizabeth of Luxembourg / Elizabeth of Hungary. And she, when Elizabeth gave birth to her daughter, Helene is the person who raised the daughter, right? She was kind of the surrogate mother to this daughter. what I'm getting at is a very trusted woman and a capable woman, a very competent woman, which is why she was so trusted, because she kept getting handed sensitive tasks and carrying them out to great success. So Elizabeth and Helene put their heads together and say, okay, we need to get the crown. We need to get the crown from this castle called Visegrad. We need to get the crown from Visegrad. We need to get it back here to Elizabeth's court, which is kind of on the move right now because this is a period leading up to a probable civil war. Things are very shaky. Get the crown back here, wait for the child to be born. If the child is a boy, slap a crown on that baby, and congratulations, the baby is a king now. But how do we do that? How are we going to accomplish it? And what they decide, Elizabeth had been at Visegrad a few months prior and had left a couple ladies in waiting there. So the excuse for Helene going to Visegrad was going to be, oh, she's just going to go pick up these ladies in waiting, right? She's going to bring the coach, and the ladies in waiting are going to be able to, the next day get in the coach and go with Helene back to Elizabeth. And okay, cool. So we have her cover story. Helene selects these two men. By the way, our source for all this is a really cool source. It's Helene's own memoirs. We don't get a lot of memoirs from the Middle Ages, and we get even fewer written by women. But Helene wrote memoirs, and because they are so hair-raising, they have survived. They've been recorded and carried through to the present day. And so Helene never tells us the names of these two Hungarian, she calls them patriots, I believe, that she's going to bring with her. Presumably, she never names them to protect their identities. And they dress all in black felt so they can move around very quietly and not be seen. They slip files into their shoes. Like, these are clearly men with an established profession and skill set that's maybe not necessarily appropriate for Queen Elizabeth to know, but hey, for her good friend, her trusted confidant, her fixer, Helene Kottner, sure. Anyway, so Helene goes to Visegrad, and this is where the heist begins. Now, Helene was present when Elizabeth locked up the crown. The crown is locked up very securely in Visegrad Castle. First, it was put in a box. And again, Helene witnessed all of this. First, it was put in a box, and the box had multiple locks placed on it. The idea behind the multiple locks is not one person acting alone can unlock the box and steal the crown. And then the locked box was placed in a room at the bottom of the castle. And then the room was sealed, and the door was locked again with multiple locks, and then sealed, very literally, with sealing wax, right? Like they put sealing wax in like these daubs or dots along the seams of the door. And then the nobles who were present at this ceremony pressed their signet rings into the hot wax to leave an imprint. So it would be clear if the seals were disturbed, because either the wax would be broken, or if they were replaced, the person doing the replacing wouldn't have access to all of these signet rings, all of these different signet rings to replace the seals as they were. Now, Elizabeth, having been the queen and undisputedly the queen at the time this was all locked up, Elizabeth had several of the keys, and it was her signet ring on several of the seals, but not all the keys and not all the seals. So Helene shows up with her two friends. And they notify the ladies in waiting, hey, we're going to leave tomorrow, get your stuff ready. Anyway, we're just going to sleep in the guest room that is adjacent to the sealed door. Don't mind us, la-di-da, everything is fine. And that night, Elizabeth or Helene stands guard over these two burglars as they do their work. And Helene describes in considerable detail what it was like. There's two really cool instances where Helene is standing on one side of a door, listening at the door to see if there's any activity in the hallway outside while the two burglars work behind her. And she swears she can hear like columns of armored men marching back and forth in the hallway. And is sorely tempted to just like throw the door open and flee because surely they are discovered, but nothing ever happens. And as near as anybody can tell, like she kind of just imagined these noises. We, of course, would attribute this to nerves, this hair-raising experience. Helene, being a product of her time, attributes the noises to both ghosts and to Satan, which I think is a really neat touch. The earlier in the evening, the two thieves had hidden their files in a stack of firewood. So if they were searched, like no big deal. But one of the servants of the castle is moving the firewood and like discovers the files. Is like, hey, whose files are these? This is weird. And everybody has to like act quick to like just smooth the whole thing over and be like, oh no, those aren't files. Like just hand them here and forget about this whole thing. And, smooth talk the situation over. Another servant, very helpfully, the burglars and Helene had kind of put some candles aside so the burglars could work by candlelight. And a servant very helpfully noticed like, hey, somebody put some candles over here. Like, that's not where candles go. Like these candles are going to be forgotten. I'm going to tidy up the room and removed the candles that they were going to depend on. So Helene also had to deal with that problem. And so what the burglars are doing during all this is first, of course, they're unlocking the locks on the door that they have the keys from Queen Elizabeth. And the others, they have to just file off because they file them right off the wall. And I think this is an amazing detail. They brought spare locks so that on their way out, of course, they can just relock the locks they have keys for. But these other locks that they had to destroy with their files, they can slap new locks on them. They can in place of the old locks. Now, if the Castellan, who has some of the keys that Helene is missing, if the Castellan comes downstairs and tries his keys in any of these locks, they won't work because it's new locks. But as long as he doesn't have a reason to do that, as long as he doesn't have a reason to check, then the theft will just go unnoticed. So they're filing off the spare locks, and they pop off all the seals because they open the door and they go in, and here's the box. And unfortunately, the locks on the box are too tight. They're too close to the wood to be filed off. So they have to use fire. They have to use fire to open up the box, which strikes me as extreme. The Crown of Hungary is fragile. It was, total aside, the Crown of Hungary was not like built in one piece. Nobody sat down to the goldsmith and was like, I would like you to make me one crown, please. Instead, like it's kind of cobbled together from multiple separate pieces of art that were already like doing good duty as a piece of art before. And so it was like, just strip the gold strips and the painted enamels off that Bible and, bend it into shape. And, we'll attach this other thing from this completely separate situation. And ta-da, it's a crown. So anyway, the crown is fragile, but by God, fire is what we're going to use to get into this box. So they're charring the box to break it open. And Helene is terrified, understandably so, that somebody's going to notice the smell of smoke, right? Somebody's going to be like, it is the middle of the night. Nobody's supposed to be cooking. And hey, the smell is coming from over here. Oh God, is there a fire? Raise the alarm. But miraculously, nobody raises the alarm about the smoke. And then They get the crown. They leave the box in the room. They close the door to the room. They lock the locks that they can. They put new locks up over to replace the destroyed old locks, and then they put sealing wax up right in the exact same spot. And Queen Elizabeth, in addition to giving Helene her keys, had also given Helene her signet ring, so she could go ahead and seal all of the seals with Elizabeth's signet ring. Now, that's all well and good for the seals that originally bore Elizabeth's signet. But many of them didn't. So again, if anybody has cause to check, if anybody's like, I wonder if there was some funny business, let me go check the seals, the jig is up. The ruse will be discovered in an instant. But as long as nobody's radar is twigged, right? Like as long as nobody says, let me stop and look carefully at this door, it'll be fine. No one will ever even know the robbery occurred. In the morning, they stuff the crown in a pillow. And in the morning, a different servant comes in and notices a piece of wood on the floor in the guest room. Is like, hey, what's this piece of wood doing here? And Helene is again like, oh my God, I know exactly what piece of wood that is. That's a piece from the box. How did it get out of the room? How did it get in my room? So they have to kind of like just play the whole thing off. It's like, oh, I don't know what that is. Clearly that's no big deal. Definitely no reason to tell anybody about this. And they bundle the ladies in waiting into the coach. They bring the pillow with them, and off they go. And at one point, they need to cross the Danube, and the nearest river crossing is, I think, a day in either direction. And they're real concerned that somebody, like any moment now, somebody's going to check the seals or check the locks and realize not necessarily that the crown is gone, but that there's some funny business going on, and like send riders after them. So they opt, instead of going a day out of their way to a river crossing, it's the middle of winter. I think it's February, maybe March. They opt to cross the frozen Danube. They opt to just take the coach and drive it across the frozen river ice. This proves to perhaps be a mistake because the coach actually falls through the river ice in the middle. But Helene is able to get everybody out of the coach okay, get the pillow out of the coach okay too, thank goodness. They make it back to Elizabeth. Soon thereafter, the child is born. It is a boy. He is crowned. He is given I have the name here. The name is delightful. He is crowned by his mother Elizabeth King Ladislaus the Posthumous. Posthumous, of course, because he was born posthumously after his father died. And there is, in fact, a civil war. Both Queen Elizabeth and the King of Poland are killed during the Civil War, rendering the whole reason for the Civil War moot. And King Ladislaus then goes on to rule, in scare quotes. He has a complicated regency because he was a child king, so he had a regent, and then just goes on to die at age 17. So the whole business was kind of completely irrelevant in the end, as so much kind of high intrigue and warfare is ultimately demonstrated to be completely meaningless and therefore, I would argue, morally dubious. But it's this amazing heist story. And Matt, from a gaming perspective, here's the thing that I really draw out of the Helene Cottoner story is most RPG systems, most rule sets give a PC about a 60% chance of success on any given roll. 60% is just sort of generally understood to be fun. You will succeed enough to be like, oh yeah, I enjoy succeeding, but you're not succeeding so much that you're like, oh, there's no challenge. There's no chance of failure. Most systems hover around the sweet spot of 60%. When we as GMs GM our first heist, right? Like take your mind back to when teenage Matt is running his early campaigns and his PCs are going to go do a heist. We have this natural inclination to want to run our heists like a heist movie because that's what we're familiar with. And so what that entails is, the PCs are sneaking and they're sneaking along and there's a guard. Okay, everybody roll me stealth to see if you can sneak past this guard. And this is our first problem is usually we say, everybody roll me stealth. Well, if there's 4 PCs and each of them only has a 60% chance of success. Well, that means that there is an almost 90% chance that someone is going to fail that roll. Which, I mean, if it's a 90% chance of failure, and presumably you're going to say, okay, well, sorry, Jim Bob got spotted. He was too noisy. You're all spotted. And now the guards are alarmed. The guards know you're here. Well, why did you even call for that roll in the first place? Hypothetical past Matt. If there's a 90% chance of failure, I mean, that's pointless. So what you need to be doing is only make the sneaky character roll stealth. What is the point of Susan deciding to play the rogue and putting all her points into stealth if her role isn't really the role that matters? I mean, really, the role that matters is the one by the fighter wearing all this clanky, heavy armor, because he's the one who's going to fail. So why did she even bother doing all this cool stuff if she's not going to, if it doesn't matter? So have Susan roll. Just ask for a roll from Susan. Maybe you can give her some penalties, some small penalties, because she's having to shepherd along these noisy people. But yeah, let Susan shine. She put all these points, she put all these resources into being sneaky. Let her show off. Let her actually use the cool stuff that she intended to be used. But then, okay, let's say you do that. The PCs managed to sneak past the first guard. Well, in a heist movie, there's a series of obstacles, right? Yep. After the first guard, then there's a guard with a dog. Then there's a laser system. Then there's a locked door. And at each obstacle, we as novice GMs are tempted, not even tempted, like our natural response is, give me a roll. And even if you're only asking one PC to roll, Susan to sneak past the guard, and then Gary to pick the lock because he's the guy who's good at picking locks. Well, then you're in the same problem, which is if you've asked 4 people to make checks, 90% chance of failure. And if your response to somebody rolled a failure is, well, you got spotted, now this is a fight. Well, Jesus Christ, why did you even present this as a heist in the first place? Because it's all but guaranteed that this is going to stop being a heist, that this is going to be a fight. And maybe you want that, right? Maybe you are playing a purely action game and you want that. Or maybe you're playing a comedy game. And so you want that kind of, the PCs are incompetent. Isn't that funny? They never can ultimately succeed at things. It always goes south. And that's fine. But if you're trying to run a straight up heist, all of your natural inclinations for how to run this are wrong. All of them won't lead you to the result that you think that you are trying to work towards, but you're actually not working towards it. You just kind of think you are. So there's a bunch of different ways to get around this. And I have been talking for over 20 minutes straight at this point, and I do apologize to that, fine listeners at home. So maybe this might be a good time for me to draw a breath and invite you to say, well, hey, Tristan, I'm actually not running my first campaign anymore and haven't been for some time. Like, here's how I solved this problem at my table.
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that we have kind of this vision of what a heist looks like because of movies and things. And then we go into the tabletop role-playing game. Well, why wouldn't you have all your players roll, right? I mean, there's stealth is on the character sheet. That's like what you're supposed to do. So I think it's just kind of a natural thing to do is just to have them roll. But of course, I mean, you're absolutely right. Anytime I had tried to do any kind of even partial heist, I mean, you start rolling and somebody fails stealth and then they just fight their way through. And that happened quite a bit. I mean, as for, some solutions, I haven't run a heist in a while, but a while back, I remember, you can handle I think I've handled it in a number of different ways. So like you had suggested, you have the so there's a situation that appears where they have to be sneaky. So you have the sneaky person roll. And then, yes, you have, some other situation happen and you have the other, the person who's good at that roll. But then, as you pointed out again, you do get to a point where somebody is going to fail. So I think I've handled it in a couple of ways. One, that the failure wasn't necessarily like just fatal to the entire mission, that, you may tip off a guard, but there's something you can do really quickly to get that guard either distracted or, knock him out real quickly, and then be like, okay, well, we're not giving away just yet. We've gotten, we almost blew it, but we didn't blow it. So we can still continue on. Some other things that I've done, I've tried like a more cinematic or story approach. I've let kind of the first part of the heist kind of just go off like they're sneaking in, and there's very few kind of consequences. So in this example, the cover story for Helene and her people was very good. So they're just able to, waltz right into the palace and take up a room right next to where the crown is hidden, or locked up, because nobody thinks anything is weird about this. And then you start to kind of bring in some of the roles and things like that. So those are a few things that I've done in the past.
And all of those are fabulous, right? They're things I have done, and they're things that work really well. I know a lot of people in particular are fans of if you fail a roll, that doesn't mean you're discovered. That means we are now briefly out of stealth mode and into solve a problem mode. Okay, are you going to, this guy has spotted you, but you have 30 seconds until he raises the alarm. Are you going to be able to clonk him on the head? Are you going to be able to sweet talk him or bribe him or something? And honestly, that is a tried and true response for a reason, right? Like that produces a very enjoyable table situation. And I really like your idea of, the rules start when you're trying to get out, right? Okay, if we blow our cover on the way out, that is a completely different problem set from blowing our cover on the way in, because now we have to fight our way out, and fighting your way out, it just feels more fun, right? Even if it is literally the exact same combat, it is just more fun.
Yeah.
A way that I like to handle it at my table, and I recognize this is peculiar to my particular preferences as a GM and as a role player, is I call for exactly one roll to get them to net the main objective, right? So in this instance, we call for one stealth roll for the whole operation of getting into the opening the door, opening the box, stuffing the crown in the pillow. That costs one roll. And if you succeed at that roll, you get your primary objective. Mm-hmm. And then I like to tempt my PCs. I like to tempt my players into staying longer in a dangerous situation, or even going deeper into a more dangerous situation. So I will say, you have snuck into the enemy camp, and here is the general that you're here to assassinate. Like, you've got it. All you have to do is smother him with his pillow. But hey, you think you hear his aide outside the tent, and his aide is talking with. Wait a minute, is that the quartermaster? Sounds like they're talking about something that might be really useful. Do you want to maybe hold on for a minute? Do you want to maybe hold off on what you came here to do and maybe listen in on their conversation, because maybe it's going to be really useful stuff? And if you do want to listen in, hey, give me another roll. And I just keep asking them to push their luck and just dangle shinies in front of their noses and say, do you want to risk it? Do you want to take another roll? Because this time, if they choose to make 4 rolls in a row, and hey, on the 4th one, like, we finally flubbed it, then it's their choice. Then they made an interesting decision. And for me, that's the thing that I enjoy most about tabletop RPGs. It's the opportunity to make interesting decisions. And it's something I really enjoy as a GM. It's something I really enjoy as a player. So other examples of interesting decisions that you might have in this Helene Cotner crown heist. You're in, right? The crown is in a sack, but the room is in disarray. The box is broken open. The door is open. If you want to, you can just climb out the window right now and you can run into the woods and you will get away, right? You will get out of the castle. I, as the GM, promise you will get out of the castle. However, if you do that, it is guaranteed that when the servants come in the morning to bring you your breakfast, they will see what has happened. They will see, hey, that door is not supposed to be open, and that the box is clearly supposed to have a crown in it. Oh my God. And now we're in a chase scene. And now we're in a chase scene through the woods. Or you can make that choice, or you can stick around, make another roll, and close up the door, put the sealing wax on the seams, and not have a chase scene in the woods, but you have to roll for it. And if you're discovered, then we've got to fight right now. And I like to offer that choice. Or in the morning, the servant notices, hey, what's this piece of wood? Okay. If you want to, you can ignore it. You can just be like, I don't know, it's wood, whatever. Like, there's a lot of wood in this castle. And get in the coach and ride on down the road. In which case, it's reasonably likely that this nosy servant will alert someone like, hey, I found this piece of wood that's really weird, right? And then maybe the castellan comes down and now his radar is twigged and he checks the locks and he checks the seals. He's like, okay, I don't know what happened here last night, but clearly there was some funny business. Let me send out some riders to catch up with the party and maybe have a conversation. And be like, hey, what exactly, like, what's going on here? Why are the seals different? Why did you obviously change the seals? You obviously changed the locks. Why? Or you can make a roll and you can roll to smooth talk you can roll to smooth talk the servant and get her to believe like, oh, whatever, actually this is nothing. I'm not worried about it anymore. And I don't necessarily present these as like, hey, these are the two outcomes, but I always try to present it as choices. And so every time the PCs decide, hey, I want a better result. I want to, we've gotten the one treasure, but I'm pretty sure there's also another treasure in the next tower over. Like, maybe we're going to push our luck. Maybe we're going to try to sneak over there too. I want to try to tempt them into attempting a better and better and better result until eventually maybe they fail, or eventually they say, you know what, we've pushed our luck far enough. We're going to walk away while we still can. And yeah, that's how I always try to do it at my table. And I recognize this is not for everyone. This is not everybody's preference. It does require more prep ahead of time. So it's not a no prep game master sort of way to do it. But when I can, this is how I try to do all stealth scenarios at my table.
Yeah, and I think it is an awesome idea, and I can see I can see why you would do it that way, and I think it would add a lot to the players' role playing, and of course, knowing players like we do, they kind of always want to press their luck until it's almost too late. So yeah. And but one interesting thing though that I was thinking about Heist, like if you think about heist movies, I think those are probably the most prevalent genre that we can talk about. Some of the best ones are happen around something that has gone wrong. Right. Mm-hmm. So Reservoir Dogs, what is it? The Usual Suspects, mm-hmm. Something along those lines where something goes wrong. So, I always, or even if you're thinking about like a military operation, you think of, say, the raid on Osama bin Laden, mm-hmm. one of the helicopters crashes. Right. Mm-hmm. And, just like something always goes wrong and it makes it, I think it, it just adds another layer to it. But I think the key is like what you had said initially, is just like, if the something that goes wrong just like blows the whole thing, and you just turn the castle, the crown heist into, running through a dungeon to, to the crown room or whatever, then it doesn't even make any sense of why you even started it as a heist. So I'm just thinking of ways that, something can possibly go wrong that would kind of heighten the drama around the heist.
So there, of course, are always ways that a heist can go wrong, and you listed some great examples there. For me, and I recognize, I will concede, and this is a bad habit, that I do prep for my games more than you do, and as a consequence, I guess I have less free time than you do, and that is a shame. Like you're the no prep GM for a reason. Prepping for what if things go wrong? How can it be interesting, right? How can I do Reservoir Dogs is a great movie. How can I set up a really cool Reservoir Dogs, who is the snitch, interesting consequences of everything going sideways. And also, well, what if everything goes right? Okay, how do I make that interesting? Because it's a really boring session if it's just, okay, single roll, we got the crown, now we're leaving, and there's no chase through the woods, like we're gone. Like, cool, I'm really glad I showed up to game night. Like, I'm really glad I drove half an hour to your house for this. This was terrific. I guess I'll see you guys next week. Like, nobody wants that. So if you have to prepare for it being interesting in both directions, that doubles your amount of prep. And of the amount of prep you do, probably you're only going to use half of it. Because if things go sideways, then you're probably not going to use the interesting consequences of everything going well, and vice versa. So what I would say is, if you as a GM want to tell a really cool Reservoir Dogs story, start it in media res. Just tell your players, hey, no, I can see you. I can see you gearing up to do the heist planning. I can see that you at this table, like you've rolled out the blueprints and you're starting. Let me just tell you guys, this is going to go sideways, and let's just fast forward to 5 minutes after you arrive, and everything is sideways. And let me describe the situation. Okay, now go. What do you do about that? And you have to know your players, right? As with everything in game mastering, you have to know your players. Some players really rebel against that. Some players really say, well, Jesus, why did I even show up if you're just going to tell me that it's going to go sideways? Other players really love that. Other players say, ooh, wow, okay. Because you just told me that everything is going to go sideways, I know that you've got something cool lined up, right? I trust you, man. I know you're not going to throw us into this fire just to laugh. Like, you have something interesting up your sleeve, and I'm excited to watch this play out. And the interesting choices I get to make in this situation are more than worth the fact that I didn't get to make the interesting choice that determined whether or not this all went sideways. So you got to know your players. But if you have players who are willing to trust you, who are okay with having that player agency briefly taken away from them and then given it back on the promise that, like, no, it's a really interesting situation. I promise, guys, just go with me on this. That is how I would do it. I would just say, okay, we're doing Reservoir Dogs tonight, guys. Let's go with it. But, you got to know if your party's going to be cool with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great solution. I think actually that, in medias res is a great way to kind of launch a campaign, because, you're probably familiar with the old trope, as many of our listeners, of you start in a tavern and you don't know each other and you're trying to meet or something like that. I always like trying to start the players in the middle of action and give them something so that can kind of build off of. And I'm thinking of a Star Wars campaign that I ran some years back, where I started they're smugglers, right? They're smugglers. They're going to do this. They're doing some kind of shady deal to get some, cargo that the empire has said is illegal to carry, and they're going to smuggle it. Well, I started with them getting the cargo and the empire raiding the facility, and it really forced the players to kind of react to some things really quickly. They got to know their characters really quickly, and they kind of pulled together as a team within the first 5-10 minutes of the session, and we just kind of used that. Then the players, of course, got interested in why or how the Imperials found that facility, which I had not planned for, since I am the no prep GM. And they got interested in that. And that became kind of the basis of the entire campaign, was them trying to figure out who gave them up and why the Imperials knew where they were at that time. And I thought it worked out really well.
I am a huge fan of starting campaigns. I can never remember how to pronounce the phrase, in media res, in medias res, whatever it is. Yeah. Huge fan. First sessions of new campaigns are always awkward because, you don't quite have the chemistry yet. You're not quite sure how everybody's interacting with everybody else, and giving players an immediate situation to deal with. In no way eliminates the awkwardness, but does a lot to reduce it. My personal favorite trope of this is in traditional D&D, you have, the party meets in a tavern. In Dark Sun D&D, the second edition trope was the party are all slaves in a slave caravan. The revolt has just begun. What do you do? Here you are. You're in the middle of the desert. There's a bunch of slavers. There's a bunch of folks alongside you who are revolting. Go. And I think that is a fabulous way to handle it. And then once the slave revolt is over, once you have strangled all of the people who were trumping you across the desert, then you have something to talk about with the other PCs, as opposed to just being like, oh, you're an elf. What's up with that?
That's a cool sword.
Exactly. Instead, it's like, wow, all right. So, boy, we're in a pickle now. Here we are, middle of the desert, wanted fugitives. What are we going to do about this situation? Yeah, I guess you're an elf. Like, I could ask about what's up with that, but like, hey, wanted fugitives.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it gives them an immediate reason to help each other as well, right? Because you have just a common goal right there. Get away from these people. They're our enemy. So, so we can all be, we can all work together because those people are our enemy. And now we have to survive. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Yeah. All right. Well, we've talked about this one quite a bit. I mean, obviously, for fantasy, you could just go right into the Crown Heist. Works perfectly. In science fiction, if you're running like a Dune campaign, you don't even have to change anything. It still works. It just works there. In that. So, we talked about this one, obviously, for almost the entire length of an episode. At this point, we had two other ones that we were kind of planning on talking about. Maybe we can kind of give a 30,000 foot view of these couple of situations really quick.
Sure. All right. We'll do 30,000. We'll do 30,000 feet. So we're going to talk about.
We're going to go back to Mali. We had actually talked about a different situation in Mali in another episode, but this was another one. So like medieval or, kind of Middle Ages Mali is like rife with all kinds of interesting situations.
Oh, it really is. I'm a big fan of Mali as a source of adventure hooks and NPCs. Like there's just a lot that's really, really interesting going on in medieval Mali. This one is a little bit later. And farther south than what we last talked about, it's a story about fate and succession. And this one is also about kings. And the 30,000 foot view of it is that there is this child that is destined to become a king. Everyone acknowledges it. All the magicians, all of the Islamic scholars all look at this kid and be like, look, we've got special knowledge of how to tell the future, and this kid is just going to be king. Like, There's no way around it. And the current king is less than enthusiastic about that fact because he has 4 sons. And if this kid is going to be king, presumably that means his sons don't get to be king. And he is cross about that situation. So he keeps, trying to set up situations that will get the child killed so that the child won't be able to be king. He tries to frame the child for a crime, but the child always manages to kind of luck his way out of it. He sends the child off to become a slave to a distant potentate, but the distant potentate is, alas, an Islamic scholar and is able to be like, oh, you are destined to become a king. If I accept you as a slave, you will take your revenge upon me and my family when you eventually become king. Nope, back you go, back to southern Mali. He, sends him to be a tax collector on the distant fringes of the empire in hopes that a bandit or a jinn will get this kid. And nope, kid makes it through just fine. And in fact, every stage he winds up a little better off than he was before. And so the king, resigns himself, and eventually the king dies, and the kid does not become king. The king's eldest son becomes king. And then the eldest son dies a little bit later, and his next oldest brother becomes king. And, that's weird. But the next oldest brother is overthrown in a coup, and he is killed. And the kid is one of the soldiers in the palace guard, so one of the people behind the coup. And you're expecting that the story is going to be like, and then the kid becomes king because he's one of the coup people. And nope. Instead, the coup plotters are just like, senior most member of the palace guard, Gary, to continue with the Gary name example. Gary, you're now the king. And the kid doesn't do anything about it. And like the king continues to change over time and time again until finally king number 8 or whatever dies, and the kid is simply the oldest member of the palace guard at this point. So he just sort of becomes king because this was the established precedent. And it's a story about how in the conception of the Bambara people who tell this story about their Bamana empire, that there is no escaping fate. That fate will come whether you want it to or not, and there's really no reason to get particularly upset about it. Like, don't try to change fate because you can't do it. Don't try to work towards fate because it's going to happen no matter what. Like, yeah, man, it's fate. Deal with it. And I love the story from a gaming perspective because it presents, if you are in a fictional setting where fate is a thing, cool, there is this kid. He is fated to become king, or maybe not a kid because, again, know your players. Because if it is a kid, things could go ugly. Again, the king was trying to get the kid killed, and a lot of players, very understandably, are less than thrilled about that. So there's this guy. He's going to become
the Hunger
king.
Games, and then everybody.
Yes, exactly. then we're all in for it. There's this guy. He's going to become king. The current king is less than thrilled about this situation. He hires the players, like the PCs, like, make this problem not be a problem for me anymore. And you can throw the PCs at this problem, and after 1 or 2 attempts on this guy's life or station or blackmailing him or whatever are foiled by complete and utter chance, right? And like, there's an instance in the story where the kid is saved because his mom is given a gift of a fish, and in the fish's stomach is the thing he needed, right? So like, after some ridiculous chance like that, what do the PCs do about this situation, right? Like, do you go back to the king and just like, deal with it, buddy? Like, can't deal with fate. Do they come up with some very clever solution to try to get around fate? I am always all in for PCs coming up with clever and often off the wall solutions to straightforward problems.
So your idea is that they would be preventing the person to become king? Is that?
My idea is that they are attempting to work against fate. And Can they work against fate? If they conclude that they are working against fate, do they just throw in the towel? Do they try to come up with some clever solution that, gets around fate without really going at fate head on? Maybe it's a puzzle. At the end of the day, is defeating fate is a puzzle, and I am a huge fan of puzzles at the table where I, the GM, have not bothered to come up with a solution, because I figured out years ago that the solution I come up with for puzzles is never the one the PCs wind up using. They always come up with something I never expected. So why do we even bother coming up with solutions? Right? Just here's a problem. Deal with it, guys. Like, I don't know. I look forward to being just as surprised as you are.
Yeah, that's why I stopped prepping.
Yes, imagine that. And there is one final wrinkle on this story, which is there's a different Bombra story. This was the story of Ngolo Diarra. There is another story, the story of I have his name written down here somewhere, Bakari John Kone, which is a very similar story about, hey, this child, he is fated to become king. The king is not thrilled about the situation. And in the Bakari John Kone story, and as an aside, what makes these stories even more interesting to me is Ngolo Diarra and Bakari John Kone are real people. They really were kings in the Bamana Empire, but our best sources for their lives are these griot stories, these oral tradition songs and epics, and that kind of puts them in this really interesting gray area of between history and legend. That I think the ambiguity is really fun, because again, they are definitely real people and they lived, frankly, not that long ago. This is, I think, 1600s. Anyway, so in the Bakari John Kone story, the king's sons go out and try to kill the kid. They tie him up, they beat the tar out of him, and they leave him to die in the bush. And he gets better. And they do it again, and they do it a third time. And it's miraculous that this kid isn't dead 3 times over. And the kid eventually has enough, and he kills the king's oldest son. And this is obviously a tragedy several ways over. It's a tragedy that children would do something so horrible to each other. It is a tragedy that the king's son has to die. Like, this is a tragic situation. But if the PCs are in a situation where they have been assigned to kill person X who's going to become king, and they see other people actively killing him, tying him up, beating him to where he should be dead and leaving him in the bush to die, what do they do about that? If the other people kill this person, then the PCs have failed, because they were tasked to kill this person and they didn't kill him because somebody else killed him. So do you intervene? If you intervene, aren't you going against the spirit of what you were told to do? And if you don't intervene and fate winds up going the way fate is supposed to, if this person winds up becoming king, well, yeah, he's probably going to remember that you could have done something about this time that he was beaten almost to death and left to die, and you didn't do anything about it. And he's probably going to be less than thrilled about that situation. So that final little wrinkle from another similar story is I think another fun way that you can complicate the puzzle, the problem of, we're trying to go against fate. How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever run something like that, like kind of going against fate like that. So that's an interesting kind of situation. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, it's all just a puzzle. Everything is ultimately just a puzzle.
Yeah, I could though also see some, if you keep like bringing the person back to life or giving them help and stuff, I could see at some point players like losing their minds and think you're just like the GM's just like, kind of jerking them around or something like that.
Absolutely. A huge amount of it depends on player trust. If they trust that you are not just jerking them around, then they may start looking for like, okay, why does he keep coming back to life? Matt would not do this just to be a dick to us. Matt, has our best interests at heart. Matt is rooting for our characters. Clearly there is something going on. And then they'll dig into that. But if you don't necessarily have that trust, or if you do have players who kind of want a little bit more of an immediate gratification, then don't do this, because I would expect it would take 2 times, right? If the person is saved by pure luck once, they're like, okay, that was weird. And if they're saved by pure luck twice, then, hey, maybe there's a reason to dig in deeper. And if you know that your players aren't going to be willing to sit through 2 instances of that, then don't do it.
Oh, that's cool. And yeah, I don't know. I'm finding some of this fascinating. Like you said, I can see why you kind of returned to Mali a number of times for some kind of intricate, almost kind of relationships and scenarios. So that's really cool. So
I think that's a really good word for it. I never thought about it quite that way, but yeah. Most of this stuff, most of the personal relationships and the political situations and the religious situations going on in medieval and early modern Mali is intricate. I like that.
All right. And now we had one last one we were going to talk about. This is about a monk, right?
Yeah. So this guy, he was writing anonymously, but he included enough references to like his life that we've been able to tentatively identify him as a known monk at a particular monastery in what is today Switzerland, known as Notker the Stammerer, which I think is an amazing name. Yes. I think we should be naming everyone Notker the Stammerer.
I thought it was a great, I mean, that's like a D&D, like old school D&D character name, like right
absolutely.
off. Yeah, absolutely.
So around 884 AD, Notker was trying to ingratiate himself with King Charles the Fat. And Charles the Fat was the king of a kingdom called Francia, which covered roughly modern France and Germany, roughly. And so Notker was trying to get in good with Charles the Fat. And he decided that the way he was going to do this is he was going to write a biography of Charles's great grandfather, Charlemagne. Charlemagne was, of course, the first Holy Roman Emperor. He is an enormously influential figure in early medieval Europe, still thought of incredibly highly by the French and by certain other European nationalities today. And so Notker was like, okay, I'm going to write a biography of Charlemagne, but I'm going to make sure that this is just like an extraordinary positive biography because I want Charles the Fat to like me. And so I'm going to make sure that I just say, oh, wow, your great granddad Charlemagne, like he was the best. Let me tell you about all these amazing ways that he was the best. And what's great about this biography is it was written 70 years after Charlemagne died, which means 70 years is kind of a very special sweet spot because it is short enough that you can still talk to people, not very many, but there are still people around who met Charlemagne and who, in fact, were old enough when they met Charlemagne that they may even remember meeting Charlemagne. So the man is in living memory, but it's also long enough that most of the people who've met Charlemagne are dead. And the stories about Charlemagne have had a chance to grow in the retelling. So these stories about Charlemagne that Notker is writing down are really just rumors that he heard once because he's a monk. He didn't travel very much. It's not like he was hanging out with, the great figures of the age who were telling him like, yes, I remember when my dad was a count under Charlemagne. Here's what he always told me. Like, no, this is just stories that happened to make it to Notker's monastery. It was a big monastery. It was an important monastery, but it's a monastery in Switzerland. So he's writing down all these stories, and the stories are ridiculous. Like, they are just ridiculous. And my favorite stories from this are stories about some of Charlemagne's bishops. And they are these ridiculous rumors that Notker the Stammerer is helpfully writing down for us as if they're gospel truth. And they are wonderful. So he tells this one story about a bishop that he doesn't name, but we can identify, right? Like the bishop in question is a guy named Rickulf, the Archbishop of Mainz. I'm bad at German pronunciation. And it's not clear if Notker was intentionally writing about Archbishop Rickulf or if he was just offering up some descriptions like generic, like, this is what an archbishop is supposed to be like. But there was only one archbishop under Charlemagne who meets all the descriptions that Notker offers. And so we get the story about Archbishop Rickulf as being this spendthrift who was always buying rare, extravagant, stupid things. And so Charlemagne decides, like, I need to teach this Rickulf guy a lesson. Like, this isn't what all of his archbishop money is for. It's not for buying stupid things. It's for doing church stuff. So Charlemagne reaches out to this merchant who travels between the Holy Land and Francia, trading goods. And he tells the merchant, look, I need you to swindle Archbishop Rickulf. I need you to come up with the dumbest thing you can possibly imagine and sell it to him for the most possible amount of money, just so I can make fun of this guy, because I don't like him. And I need to teach him a lesson. So the merchant takes a dead mouse, and just like fills it up with spices and perfumes and stuff, and takes it to Rickulf. Is like, hey, Mr. Archbishop, I heard you like to collect rare and exotic things. Here is this cool animal that I bought in the Holy Land, and look how weird it is. Smell it. Smell how wonderful it smells. Like, this is a real cool animal. And gets Rickulf to offer him like progressively greater and greater amounts of money, where like Rickulf will offer an obscene amount of silver, and the merchant will be like, oh, that doesn't even cover transportation costs. Don't insult me. And ultimately, like, Rickulf just offers an insane amount of silver. The merchant decides he has pushed his luck far enough. He accepts the money. He runs off to Charlemagne, gives Charlemagne the money so he doesn't run off with the money. And Charlemagne is able to be like, Rickulf, what have you done? And shames Rickulf. And I think that this is just a really delightful scenario where you could totally put the PCs in the role of the merchant, right? Like, some local authority figure. It's like, hey, there's some other like subordinate authority figure to me, but very important person who, like, I need to make fun of. I need to shame this guy to teach him a lesson. I just need you guys to swindle him. I don't need to know the details. Just swindle him for me. And, if you make a lot of money off it, please give me the money, because that's the equivalent of taxpayer money. Yes, the equivalent of taxpayer money. So, please give it back to me when you get it, but just swindle him. Take him for a ride. And again, with puzzles that you don't necessarily need to know the answer to when you pose them, just, here you go, guys, swindle this NPC. Go forth and do great things. And then the GM can just kind of sit on his hands for the rest of the session while the players connive and scheme and swindle. And I just think it's a fabulous little story.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it would be fun to see what the players would come up with in that. Sadly, whenever I try to have somebody swindle the players, it never works.
Yeah, they're canny, right? Like, players are deeply mistrustful of everything GMs hand them for reasons I've never been able to determine.
Yeah, I know. It's like, hey, buy this spaceship from me at a discount price. Oh, no, nobody's falling for that. Something's wrong with it. But yeah, I think that one is pretty funny. I think, and I especially too the kind of like is in a fantasy setting with like the mysterious animal. Mm-hmm. I think that is I know, of course, in the real world, that was something that was kind of, that fascinated people, for a long time. It's just these rare animals from places that, China or something that just seemed like it lived in, myth, because hardly anybody had been there or something. And so I really like that kind of this mysterious animal kind of thing as well.
A great example from of that is, in fact, in China, the explorer / diplomat, it's complicated, we don't need to get into it, Zheng He brought back from the Middle East a giraffe. And this Iranian potentate had acquired a giraffe as a gift from a different potentate in East Africa. Just sort of like, here, a gift for the son of heaven, the great king of China. Here is this animal, we call it a giraffe. And Zheng He brings it back. And the giraffe kind of lined up with the Kirin, the mythical, you'll sometimes hear it referred to as the Chinese unicorn. Yeah. And the Kirin was a symbol of divine favor. If a Kirin was spotted, it means that, everything is right in the world. Clearly the emperor is just and, righteous, and everything's great. So for a Kirin to show up, right, to be brought to the court and be like, here's a Kirin, you guys. They said it was called a giraffe, but this is clearly a Kirin. We know what they look like. So the emperor was absolutely over the moon. Like, oh my goodness, this is the greatest thing in the world. So Genki, goes on his next expedition, and kind of word gets out in the Indian Ocean that the Chinese love giraffes, that they're all about giraffes. And so over the next several years, there's just kind of this series of giraffes delivered by Zheng He as gifts to the emperor back in China. Like, look, guys, another Kirin. Clearly, things are the best they could ever conceivably be. Like, we're lucky if we get one sighting per emperor, and here we've got like 5 at court today. You can go see them. I think it's just a fabulous little story.
Yeah, I've loved that story. And isn't he the one, he sailed all the way to like Mogadishu, they think?
Yes. Yeah. It's not entirely clear where in East Africa he landed, but multiple places in East Africa, more than likely.
Yeah. And I always thought that would be like the best scene in like, a big epic movie would be to have the Emperor of China there, and this guy comes back and he opens the door in a dramatic way and he brings in a giraffe, and everybody thinks it's like a god or a mythical creature. I just always thought that would be like the coolest scene ever.
Yes, that would be absolutely fabulous. And hey, I'm going to have a Zheng He post go live here in the next couple of weeks. So maybe the next time I'm on the mics, we can talk a different Zheng He thing.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That would be awesome. All right. Well, Tristan, I've had you on here, a long time. We've talked about tons of situations. As always, I feel if there are some game masters out there who listen to our chats and they can't get some kind of situation, I think they should probably just maybe stop running some games and play more or something like that, or find a different hobby, because you always bring a ton of cool information and a lot of situations that can be mined in all different ways for all different settings and time periods. So I appreciate that. Just remind everybody, where can they find your articles?
So if you head to moltensulfur.com, and I believe that will be in the show notes, you can find new content every week. And of course, old content as well. I've got several other. We just touched on one rumor about one bishop from Charlemagne. I got several others in the post. Go into considerable more detail about Ngolo Diarra and his not actively pursued quest to become king. And yeah, I am arrogant enough to think that I have lots of cool stuff for your game mastering pleasure.
All right. And as you mentioned, for any listeners out there, as Tristan said, the links will be in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So you can check that out there and learn about Tristan's blog and find some books that he has written as well. So Tristan, thank you just so much for coming on the show again.
Oh, thank you.
All right, guys, another show in the books. It is always a pleasure to have Tristan come on the show and talk about history and literature and folklore. We talked about a ton of stuff today that you can take right now and add it into your existing campaign so you don't have to pull your hair out or go crazy. So as always, in the show notes for this episode, I have provided links to Tristan's blog where you can read more about the situations we discussed on the podcast, as well as tons and tons of other history articles, folklore articles, and articles about literature, all aimed at creating situations and scenarios you can use in your existing campaigns. So check out the show notes at dicegeeks.com. Now, hey guys, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of the show. And each and every Friday, you will get an update from me letting you know what I am creating to help you play better games. Also, if you want to support this show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/free. Every single penny is greatly appreciated, and it just helps me understand that this show is valued and that I should keep making these episodes. If finances are tight, which I totally understand, you can do something that will take only just a couple of seconds. You could rate, review, subscribe, or like this podcast wherever you are listening to it. You can do those things for free right in the app or player or website that you are listening to this podcast on. Those things help people find the show. That's pretty much simply what it is. Liking, rating, reviewing, and subscribing help more people find the show. And if you were to do one of those things, I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. I thank you so much for listening. And until next Wednesday, keep gaming.